Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, we gently open the door to timeless truths, revealing a path to profound rest and a deeper understanding of letting go. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. We will share a selection of ancient Buddhist wisdom, each a gentle key to unlock the secrets of mental tranquility and emotional ease. Each tale contains a transformative teaching that can shift your entire relationship with the burdens of worry, the grip of control, and the relentless pull of the day. These aren't just stories. They are lost teachings from those who understood something most of us have forgotten, that true peace isn't found in holding on, but in the art of release. As the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "The most important thing is to just be yourself and to fully enjoy your life in this moment." Over the course of our journey, you'll discover exactly how these ancient truths can transform your experience of life, ushering in a quiet liberation. The tightly held tensions will begin to soften. The constant demand for your attention will start to diminish. You'll find yourself naturally settling into a state of deep clarity and unburdened ease. So, gently settle in now. Let your body surrender into whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you're about to receive teachings that have been waiting to guide you towards ultimate rest. Let us begin with our first teaching about the transformation of generosity. This is the giver should be thankful. In a remote mountain monastery, a young student found himself entrusted with managing the community's finances during a harsh winter. The surrounding villages had been struck by famine, and each day brought desperate families to the monastery gates, their faces gaunt with hunger, their children clinging to empty bowls. The student, moved by their suffering, opened the storehouse generously, distributing rice with a compassionate heart. Each evening, as he watched families return to their homes with full sacks, he felt a warm satisfaction spreading through his chest. He was doing good work, he told himself. He was helping people survive. There was a subtle pride in his generosity, a quiet self-congratulation that felt righteous and pure. One morning, his master approached him in the courtyard where he was preparing the day's distributions. "Tell me," the old monk said, his eyes twinkling with gentle curiosity, "how do you feel when you are giving the rice to the people?" The student paused, considering the question carefully. "I feel a quiet satisfaction, master, and I am grateful that we have enough to help them." The master nodded slowly, as if weighing something invisible. "That is good, but I want you to try something different tomorrow. When you give the rice, I want you to truly understand that the person receiving it is doing you a great favor. You must feel that you are the one who should be thankful." The student's brow furrowed in confusion. How could someone receiving charity be doing him a favor? The logic seemed backwards, almost absurd, but he had learned to trust his teacher's wisdom, even when it challenged his understanding. The next morning, as he handed a heavy bag of rice to a weathered woman with hollow cheeks, he bowed his head deeply and said with genuine feeling, "Thank you for allowing me to practice giving today." The woman's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears of recognition. Something shifted in that moment, not just in her, but in him. He continued this practice with each person who came to the gates, and gradually, a profound transformation began to unfold within him. The Buddha once said, "If you knew what I know about the power of giving, you would not let a single meal pass without sharing it in some way." What emerges from this story is a revolutionary understanding of the nature of true generosity. Why do we struggle to let go of the ego that comes with giving? Zen Buddhism reveals several layers to this spiritual challenge. Our minds naturally create hierarchies, placing ourselves in the position of the generous benefactor and others in the role of grateful recipients. This subtle superiority, while often unconscious, creates a barrier between us and authentic compassion. We also become attached to the feeling of being needed, of being the source of someone else's relief. There's an intoxicating power in having what others lack, in being able to solve problems and alleviate suffering. This attachment to our role as helper can become as binding as attachment to material possessions. Additionally, our cultural conditioning teaches us that giving is virtuous and receiving is somehow lesser. We learn to take pride in our independence and to feel uncomfortable with dependence. This creates a fundamental misunderstanding about the interconnected nature of existence. The student's transformation reveals what Zen calls no-gap giving. When we truly understand that the receiver is essential to the act of giving, that without them, our generosity would have no expression, the artificial separation between giver and receiver dissolves. The hungry woman wasn't just receiving rice. She was providing the student with an opportunity to embody compassion, to practice letting go of attachment, to discover the joy of selfless service. Zen Master Dogen taught, to give is to receive. This isn't mere wordplay, but points to a profound truth about the nature of reality. In the deepest sense, there is no separate giver or receiver, only the flowing movement of compassion expressing itself through apparent individuals. Consider how this wisdom applies to your daily interactions. When someone allows you to help them, they're offering you a gift, the chance to step beyond your small self and participate in the larger dance of mutual support. When a friend accepts your advice, when a stranger lets you hold the elevator, when a child receives your patient attention, they're providing you with precious opportunities for spiritual practice. The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. True letting go in giving means releasing our attachment to being the source, the hero, the one who makes the difference. It means recognizing that we are all part of an infinite web of interdependence. Tonight, as you reflect on the ways you've given and received today, can you sense the gifts you've been offered by those who accepted your kindness? Can you feel gratitude, not just for what you could provide, but for being provided with opportunities to love and serve? As the Buddha reminded us, the gift of truth surpasses all other gifts. The truth revealed in genuine giving is that in letting go of the ego of generosity, we discover the boundless joy of simply being a vehicle for love's expression in the world. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about accepting life's natural rhythms. This is the natural order. A powerful governor, flush with success and wealth, approached a renowned Zen master known throughout the province for his exquisite calligraphy. The governor's family had prospered for generations, and he wanted to commission a piece that would ensure their continued fortune and happiness for centuries to come. "Master," he said, presenting a silk scroll of the finest quality and a purse heavy with gold coins. "I want you to create a blessing for my family line. Write something that will bring us endless prosperity and keep misfortune from our door." The old master accepted the commission with a quiet bow. He prepared his materials with reverent care, grinding the ink to perfect consistency, arranging his brushes with precision. The governor waited expectantly, already imagining the auspicious words that would grace his ancestral hall. With fluid, masterful strokes, the master wrote 3 simple lines. Father dies, son dies, grandson dies. The governor's face turned crimson with rage. His hands trembled as he stared at the scroll. "What is this?" he shouted. "I asked for a blessing of happiness and prosperity. You mock my family with talk of death. This is a curse, not a blessing." The master remained perfectly calm, his weathered hands folded peacefully in his lap. "This is no curse," he replied gently. "This is the greatest blessing I could possibly write for your family." The governor sputtered in disbelief. "How can writing about death be a blessing? Are you mad?" The master's eyes held infinite compassion as he explained. "Consider what would happen if your son were to die before you. The grief would be unbearable, unnatural, devastating beyond measure. If your grandson were to die before your son, that sorrow would compound across generations, leaving wounds that might never heal." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "For a family to have its members pass on in this natural order, with each generation living their full span before the next departs, this is the truest form of prosperity. I have written your family a blessing of natural, timely passage, free from the tragedy of reversed order." The governor stared at the scroll, his anger slowly dissolving like morning mist. He had been clinging to an impossible dream of defying nature itself, of somehow transcending the fundamental rhythms of existence. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, everything is impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The deeper teaching here shows us that true peace comes not from avoiding life's natural cycles, but from embracing them with wisdom and grace. Why do we resist the natural order so fiercely? Zen Buddhism illuminates several patterns in our relationship with impermanence. We develop what might be called immortality fantasies, unconscious beliefs that we and our loved ones should somehow be exempt from the universal law of change. This denial creates enormous suffering because it sets us in opposition to reality itself. We also cling to what we might call permanence projects, attempting to create lasting monuments to ourselves and our families. While there's nothing wrong with building and creating, when these efforts stem from a desperate need to avoid mortality, they become sources of anxiety rather than joy. Additionally, our culture often treats death as failure rather than fulfillment. We speak of losing someone to death, as if their natural completion of life's journey were somehow a defeat. This language reveals our fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to live fully within the natural order. The governor's transformation reveals what Zen calls flow consciousness, the recognition that resisting life's natural rhythms creates turbulence while accepting them brings peace. Just as a river flows smoothly when it follows its natural course but becomes chaotic when dammed or diverted, our lives find their greatest harmony when we align with, rather than oppose, the deeper patterns of existence. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This seemingly paradoxical statement points to the balance between accepting what is while remaining open to growth and change. We are perfect within the natural order, even as that order includes constant transformation. Consider how this wisdom applies to your relationship with aging, loss, and change. Instead of viewing these as enemies to be defeated, can you see them as part of life's natural artistry? The wrinkles that appear on your face tell the story of countless smiles and expressions of care. The changes in your body reflect a lifetime of movement and experience. The loss of loved ones, while painful, completes the circle of their unique contribution to the world. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. Rather, it means distinguishing between what can be influenced and what must be accepted. We can work for health and happiness while remaining at peace with the ultimate trajectory of all life toward completion. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The word that brings peace in the face of impermanence is yes. Yes to the natural order. Yes to the cycles of beginning and ending. Yes to the profound beauty of lives fully lived within their proper seasons. Tonight, as you consider the natural rhythms of your own life, can you find gratitude for the privilege of participating in this ancient dance of birth, growth, flowering, and completion? Can you sense the blessing inherent in being part of something larger than your individual story? As the Buddha taught, the trouble is, you think you have time. By accepting the natural order with grace, we discover that every moment becomes precious, every relationship sacred, every day a gift to be fully received and completely offered. Let us now turn to a tale about the dangers of spiritual attachment. This is the cold heart. For 20 years, a wealthy and devout old woman had supported a monk in his spiritual practice. She had provided him with a comfortable hut deep in the forest, brought him daily meals of simple but nourishing food, and supplied him with warm robes for the harsh winters. She asked for nothing in return, except that he dedicate himself completely to his meditation and spiritual development. As the years passed, she occasionally wondered about his progress. Was he growing in wisdom and compassion? Had her generous support helped him advance along the path to enlightenment? She was patient and respectful, never disturbing his practice with questions, but her curiosity about his spiritual state continued to grow. One day, she decided to test his development. She approached a young woman from the village, known for her beauty and charm, and made an unusual request. "I need you to help me understand something about the monk I've been supporting. Go to his hut and embrace him suddenly. Then ask him, 'What now? What do you feel in this moment?' Pay careful attention to his response and return to tell me exactly what he said." The young woman agreed, though she was puzzled by the strange request. She made her way through the forest to the monk's secluded hut. Finding him deep in meditation, his eyes closed and his posture perfectly still, she suddenly threw her arms around him and whispered urgently, "What now? What do you feel in this moment?" The monk didn't flinch or show any sign of disturbance. Without opening his eyes, he replied in a detached, almost mechanical voice, "An old tree on a cold rock in winter. Nowhere is there any warmth." The young woman released him and returned to report his exact words to the old woman. Upon hearing the monk's response, the benefactor's face darkened with disappointment and anger. "To think I have supported this man for 20 years, she cried. "He showed no understanding, no compassion for a human being in front of him. He saw only a temptation to be resisted and responded with cold detachment to demonstrate his spiritual purity. This is not wisdom, this is spiritual vanity." Without hesitation, she went to the monk's hut and set it on fire, ending her support immediately. As the Buddha observed, the middle way avoids the extremes of sensual indulgence and self-mortification. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound spiritual trap the monk had fallen into: attachment to his own emptiness. What emerges from this story is a crucial understanding about the nature of authentic spiritual development. The monk had successfully cultivated detachment from worldly desires, but he had become attached to his identity as someone who was detached. He had traded one form of clinging for another, perhaps more subtle, but equally binding. Why do we fall into this trap of spiritual materialism? Zen Buddhism reveals that the ego is remarkably cunning in its strategies for survival. When we begin to see through material attachments, the ego doesn't simply disappear. It reinvents itself as the spiritual self, the one who meditates, the one who is enlightened, the one who is above worldly concerns. This spiritual ego can be even more problematic than ordinary ego because it masquerades as humility while actually representing the height of pride. The monk's response revealed this perfectly. Instead of meeting the young woman's humanity with warmth and understanding, he used the encounter as an opportunity to display his spiritual attainment. Additionally, we often confuse detachment with disconnection. True detachment in Zen doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or removing ourselves from life's experiences. Rather, it means engaging fully while not clinging to outcomes. It means responding to each situation with appropriate warmth or coolness, without being driven by compulsive desires or aversions. The old woman's wisdom reveals what Zen calls great compassion. She recognized that the monk had become trapped in a spiritual identity that prevented genuine human connection. Her dramatic action, burning the hut, was itself an act of compassion, forcing him to confront his attachment to being the detached one. Zen master Yunmen taught, "Medicine and sickness heal each other. The whole earth is medicine." This points to the understanding that every encounter, including the seemingly problematic ones, offers opportunities for genuine awakening if we meet them with openness rather than defensive spiritual positions. Consider how this wisdom applies to your own spiritual journey. Have you ever found yourself proud of your equanimity, attached to your non-attachment, or superior because of your spiritual practices? These are natural developments along the path, but they become obstacles when we cling to them as identities. True spiritual maturity might look quite ordinary from the outside. It responds to situations with appropriate feeling. Warmth when warmth is called for, firmness when firmness is needed, sadness when loss occurs, joy when beauty appears. It doesn't perform spirituality for itself or others. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 useless words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes that word needs to be spoken with warmth, sometimes with strength, sometimes with tears. The monk's error was thinking that spiritual advancement meant always responding with the same cold detachment. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual development, can you notice any places where you've become attached to being detached? Can you sense the difference between genuine freedom and performed spirituality? Are there areas where you've become cold in the name of wisdom? The Buddha taught, hatred cannot drive out hatred. Only love can do that. The love that drives out spiritual hatred is the willingness to remain vulnerably human even as we grow in wisdom. It's the courage to let our hearts be touched by the beauty and pain of existence without losing our center. By staying warm and responsive while remaining unattached, we discover that true enlightenment doesn't separate us from humanity. It returns us to it with deeper appreciation and more skillful love. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the power of non-acceptance. This is the unreceived gift. A hot-tempered samurai, known throughout the region for his fierce pride and quick anger, had heard rumors about a certain Zen master. People spoke of the old monk's wisdom and unshakable peace, claims that irritated the warrior's competitive nature. How could anyone remain truly unmoved in the face of direct challenge? The samurai decided to test this supposed enlightenment for himself. He strode into the monastery courtyard, where the master sat in quiet meditation beneath a flowering cherry tree. The samurai's armor clinked with each aggressive step, his hand resting on his sword hilt as he positioned himself directly in front of the serene figure. "Old man!" the samurai shouted, his voice echoing off the monastery walls. "I've heard you're some kind of wise teacher, but you look like a fraud to me." He began hurling insults with the skill of a trained warrior, each word carefully chosen to wound. He questioned the master's teachings, mocked his appearance, called him a charlatan and a deceiver. The master remained perfectly still, his eyes closed, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. His breathing stayed calm and even, as if he were listening to birds singing rather than venomous attacks on his character and reputation. The samurai's fury intensified. He cursed the master's lineage, insulted his students, and made outrageous claims about his moral character. Still, the old monk sat unmoved, his peaceful expression unchanged. If anything, his smile seemed to deepen slightly, as if he were enjoying some private joke. Finally, the samurai ran out of insults and energy. He stood panting, his face red with exertion and frustration, staring at this seemingly impervious figure. His entire arsenal of verbal weapons had been launched, and yet his target remained completely undisturbed. "How is this possible?" the samurai demanded, genuinely bewildered. "How can you sit there so calmly while I assault your honor? Do my words not sting you? Do you have no pride to defend? Are you even human?" The master slowly opened his eyes and looked at the warrior with infinite kindness. When he spoke, his voice was soft and gentle, without a trace of anger or defensiveness. "Tell me something," he said peacefully. "If someone offers you a gift and you choose not to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The samurai considered this question, his warrior's mind automatically analyzing the logic. "It belongs to the one who offered it," he replied, still breathing heavily from his emotional exertion. "Exactly so," said the master, his smile broadening with genuine warmth. "You have offered me your anger, your insults, and your hatred. I have chosen not to accept them. They remain yours to carry." The Buddha taught, holding onto anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that we always have a choice about what gifts we accept from others. Why do we so readily accept the negative offerings that others extend to us? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that make us vulnerable to receiving unwanted gifts. We operate under the unconscious belief that others' opinions of us determine our worth. When someone criticizes or insults us, we automatically assume we must defend against their attack, thereby accepting their negative assessment as worthy of our attention. We also confuse response with reception. We think that because someone has spoken harsh words to us, we must take them in and react to them. But the master demonstrates a profound truth. We can perceive someone's anger without absorbing it, witness their hostility without being contaminated by it. Additionally, our ego craves engagement, even negative engagement. There's a perverse satisfaction in feeling wronged, in having our victimhood validated, in the drama of conflict. The samurai expected the master to engage in battle, but the master refused to enter the arena at all. The samurai's transformation reveals what Zen calls non-reactive awareness. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to others' suffering. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered in our own essential nature while witnessing the storms of emotion that others may be experiencing. When someone offers us the gift of their anger, we can observe it with compassion without making it our own. We can recognize that their emotional state reflects their inner condition, not an objective truth about us. Their anger is information about their pain, not a command for us to suffer. Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, when another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over. This understanding allows us to meet others' negativity with compassion rather than defensiveness, wisdom rather than reactivity. Consider how this teaching applies to your daily interactions. When someone cuts you off in traffic, their impatience is a gift you don't have to accept. When a colleague speaks harshly to you, their stress is an offering you can decline. When family members project their frustrations onto you, their emotional turmoil is a package you can refuse to sign for. This doesn't mean becoming cold or uncaring. We can respond to others' pain with kindness while not absorbing their emotional chaos. We can offer support without taking on their suffering as our own. We can remain open-hearted while maintaining healthy boundaries. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." The peace the master demonstrated wasn't dependent on the samurai's behavior or approval. It arose from his deep understanding that his essential nature couldn't be disturbed by external circumstances, no matter how aggressive or persistent. Tonight, as you reflect on the various gifts that were offered to you today, both positive and negative, can you notice which ones you automatically accepted and which ones you might have politely declined? Can you feel the difference between responding from your center and reacting from your wounds? As the Buddha reminded us, no one can hurt you without your permission. By learning to discern between the gifts worth accepting and those better left with their givers, we discover an unshakable peace that no external circumstance can disturb. Let us now turn to a story about the heaviest attachments of all. This is the weight of a diamond. A successful merchant, proud of both his wealth and his spiritual progress, arrived at a mountain monastery with great fanfare. He had traveled far to meet a renowned Zen master, confident that his dedication to both worldly success and spiritual practice made him an exemplary student. "Master," he announced with satisfaction, settling his silk robes as he bowed, "I have achieved great freedom from attachment. My mansions mean nothing to me, they are merely shelter. My fine clothing is just fabric to cover the body. My gold and silver are simply tools for commerce. I am truly liberated from the bonds that trap ordinary people." The master listened with patient attention, observing not just the merchant's words, but his manner, his posture, the subtle ways he displayed his wealth, even while claiming indifference to it. When the merchant finished his proud declaration, the master's eyes fell upon a small, worn leather pouch hanging from the man's belt. "I see," the master said quietly. "And what is in that pouch you carry?" Instantly, the merchant's hand flew to the pouch, clutching it protectively against his body. A flash of alarm crossed his features before he caught himself and attempted to resume his composed demeanor. "This," he said, trying to sound casual while his grip remained tight. "This is different, Master. This contains a flawless diamond, my family's most precious heirloom. It has been passed down through 7 generations. It represents our security, our legacy. This is not mere attachment. This is wisdom, practical protection for my family's future." The master nodded thoughtfully, then stood and walked to a window overlooking the valley below. "I see a river down there," he said, pointing to a stream winding through the landscape. "Go there now and find a simple grey stone from the riverbank. Carry it with you for 1 week, then return to me." The merchant was puzzled by this strange request, but agreed. He spent the afternoon by the river, selecting an ordinary stone the size of his palm. For the next week, he carried it everywhere, gradually forgetting its presence as he went about his business. The stone had no value, so he felt no anxiety about losing it, no need to guard it or worry about its safety. When he returned to the monastery, the master asked, "How did you find carrying the stone?" "It was nothing, Master," the merchant replied. "I barely noticed it after the first day." "Good," the master said with a slight smile. "Now throw the stone into the river." Without hesitation, the merchant walked to the riverbank and tossed the stone into the flowing water. It disappeared with a small splash, and he felt absolutely nothing. No loss, no regret, no second thoughts. "How do you feel now?" asked the master. "Nothing at all," the merchant answered honestly. "It was just a stone." The master looked at him with penetrating kindness. "Now," he said simply, "go and do the same with your diamond." The merchant's face went pale. His hand immediately moved to protect the pouch. "Master, surely you don't mean this is completely different. The stone was worthless, but this diamond represents everything. My family's security, our honor, our future. Without it, we would be..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, attachment is the root of suffering. This tale unveils the profound difference between true freedom and the illusion of non-attachment that keeps us bound to our deepest fears. Why do we cling most tightly to our ultimate securities? Zen Buddhism reveals that we often release small attachments while strengthening our grip on the fundamental ones. We may let go of minor preferences and desires while unconsciously deepening our dependence on what we consider essential for survival or identity. The merchant's diamond represents what we might call core attachments, those possessions, relationships, beliefs, or identities that we feel define us or ensure our safety. These might be our reputation, our savings account, our family's approval, our professional status, or our physical health. We can appear quite detached from many things while remaining enslaved to these few crucial anchors. We also engage in what Zen calls spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts to avoid confronting our deepest attachments. The merchant convinced himself that his attachment to the diamond was wisdom rather than fear, practical rather than emotional. This kind of rationalization allows us to maintain our bonds while feeling spiritually advanced. Additionally, our core attachments often carry generational weight, family history, and cultural significance that make them feel sacred rather than personal. The merchant's diamond wasn't just valuable. It represented 7 generations of family legacy. These layers of meaning make it feel almost treasonous to consider letting go. The master's wisdom reveals what Zen calls radical freedom, the willingness to be secure in nothing external, to find our center in the spaciousness of letting go, rather than in the accumulation of safeguards. This doesn't necessarily mean literally giving away everything we own, but rather holding everything lightly, ready to release it if circumstances require. Zen teacher Alan Watts observed, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance." Our diamonds represent our attempts to stop dancing, to find solid ground in an inherently fluid existence. But true security comes from learning to dance with uncertainty rather than trying to escape it. Consider what serves as your diamond. What possession, relationship, achievement, or identity would you find nearly impossible to release? What do you clutch when life feels uncertain? These core attachments reveal where your deepest work lies, where your freedom is most constrained. This doesn't mean we should carelessly abandon everything important to us. Rather, it invites us to examine whether we own our diamonds or they own us. Can we enjoy security while not being enslaved by the need for security? Can we appreciate what we have while holding it with an open palm? The Buddha taught, "You only lose what you cling to." The merchant's tragedy wasn't that he owned a valuable diamond, but that the diamond owned him. His freedom was measured by the weight of what he couldn't release, his security undermined by his very need for security. Tonight, as you consider what serves as your family diamond, can you feel the weight of carrying it? Can you imagine the lightness of holding your most precious securities with the same ease as carrying a simple stone? What would it feel like to be free even from your freedom? As the Buddha reminded us, health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship. True contentment comes not from securing the perfect diamond, but from discovering that our essential nature needs no external protection. In this recognition, we find the only security that can never be lost, the peace of letting go completely. Our next story reveals the subtle poison of habitual negativity and the freedom found in contentment. This is the lesson of the monastery and the monk who never stopped complaining. In a remote mountain monastery known for its strict discipline and profound silence, a community of monks devoted themselves to deep spiritual practice. The monastery followed an ancient vow of silence, understanding that constant talking often distracts the mind from inner contemplation and genuine insight. For years at a time, the monks would practice in complete quiet, finding peace in the absence of unnecessary words. However, this particular monastery had one unusual tradition. Every 10 years, each monk was permitted to speak exactly 2 words to the head monk. This brief allowance acknowledged that sometimes practical concerns or spiritual insights might need to be communicated, while still maintaining the essential discipline of silence that supported their contemplative practice. One young monk entered this monastery with sincere intentions and dedicated himself to the demanding schedule of meditation, work, and study. But from the very beginning, he struggled with dissatisfaction. The simple accommodations felt uncomfortable, the plain food seemed inadequate, and the rigorous schedule challenged his preferences at every turn. After his first 10 years of practice, he went to the head monk for his permitted communication. The elder looked at him with kind, expectant eyes, ready to hear whatever wisdom or insight the decade of silent practice might have produced. "Bed hard," the monk said, using his 2 precious words to express his primary complaint about the sleeping arrangements. "I see," the head monk replied gently, making note of the comment, but offering no judgment or solution. The monk returned to his silent practice, but his dissatisfaction only seemed to deepen over the next decade. Instead of using the years to cultivate acceptance and inner peace, he spent his time dwelling on various discomforts and inadequacies he perceived in the monastery's provisions. His meditation became increasingly agitated as his mind rehearsed complaints he couldn't voice. When his second opportunity to speak arrived after another 10 years, he again approached the head monk. The elder greeted him with the same patient attention, curious to see how 2 more decades of practice might have influenced the monk's perspective. "Food stinks," the monk declared, using his allocated words to express his ongoing dissatisfaction with the simple vegetarian meals provided by the community. "I see," the head monk responded with unchanged equanimity, observing this second expression of complaint without surprise or criticism. Another 10 years passed, during which the monk's internal negativity continued to grow. Instead of finding freedom through spiritual practice, he had used 3 decades to perfect the art of mental complaining. His silent years were filled not with peace and insight, but with constant internal criticism of his circumstances. When his third opportunity for speech arrived, the monk appeared before the head monk with obvious agitation. 3 decades of accumulated dissatisfaction had finally reached its breaking point. "I quit," he announced emphatically, using his 2 words to express his ultimate decision to abandon the path he had never truly embraced. The head monk looked at him with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Well, I can see why," he replied compassionately. "All you've ever done is complain." The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This teaching reveals how the monk's 30 years of practice had actually reinforced the very patterns that caused his suffering rather than dissolving them. Why do we sometimes use spiritual practice to perfect our dissatisfaction rather than transcend it? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to bring our habitual mental patterns into any environment, then blame external circumstances for our internal states. The monk never truly engaged with the practice. He simply endured it while maintaining his resistance. The monastery's conditions weren't the source of the monk's suffering. His attitude toward those conditions was. Countless other monks had found peace, insight, and profound contentment in the exact same circumstances. The difference lay not in what they experienced, but in how they related to their experience. Consider your own patterns of complaint and dissatisfaction. How much of your mental energy goes toward rehearsing grievances about circumstances you cannot change? The monk spent 30 years of precious life focused on bed hardness and food quality, instead of using those same years to develop inner freedom. This story also reveals the cumulative power of our mental habits. Each day, the monk chose complaint over acceptance. He strengthened neural pathways of dissatisfaction. Over 3 decades, these patterns became so ingrained that leaving seemed like the only option, when in reality, changing his perspective had always been available. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The monk's tragedy was his failure to recognize that his dissatisfaction was impermanent and changeable. Instead of working with his resistance, he fed it daily for 30 years until it consumed his entire spiritual journey. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is 1 word that brings peace." The monk's 6 words over 30 years, all complaints, brought no peace to himself or others. Meanwhile, monks who used their practice to cultivate gratitude and acceptance found profound tranquility in the same conditions. Look deeply at your own relationship with current challenges. Where are you spending years complaining about circumstances that could be transformed through a shift in perspective? What would change if you used the same mental energy currently devoted to dissatisfaction to cultivate acceptance and inner peace? Tonight, as you notice the inevitable discomforts and imperfections of daily life, can you remember the monk's wasted decades? Can you choose gratitude over complaint, acceptance over resistance, understanding that your response to circumstances shapes your experience far more than the circumstances themselves? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The monastery offered every monk the same opportunity for peace and awakening. Some found it, others did not. Not because of external conditions, but because of the quality of attention they brought to those conditions. In every moment, we face the same choice the monk faced daily: to practice complaining or to practice contentment. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of presence and the boundaries we create between availability and solitude. This is Out Today. Master Sengai had developed an unusual habit that both puzzled and amused his community. On certain days, without any apparent pattern or warning, he would close the wooden gate to his temple quarters and paste upon it a simple handwritten sign that read, "Out Today." Yet anyone passing by could clearly see him through the spaces in the fence, walking peacefully back and forth in his front garden, tending to his plants, sitting in meditation, or simply enjoying the afternoon sunshine. The master made no effort to hide his presence. He moved about his daily activities with complete naturalness, watering flowers, sweeping leaves, or reading beneath his favorite tree. To any observer, he was obviously at home and available, making the sign's message seem like either a joke or a contradiction. One afternoon, a samurai official who had long been acquainted with the master happened to pass by the temple. Noticing Sengai clearly visible in his garden, the official approached the gate with a friendly smile and called out, "Your Reverence, I haven't seen you in some time. How have you been? I was hoping we might have a conversation." Master Sengai looked up from the chrysanthemums he was arranging and simply pointed to the sign posted prominently on his gate. "Please read what it says," he replied matter-of-factly. The samurai, increasingly confused, gestured toward the master with obvious bewilderment. "But Your Reverence, you're clearly here, aren't you? I can see you right there in front of me. You must just be kidding around." Sengai dismissed him with a gentle wave of his hand, his expression remaining perfectly serious. "That sign says I'm out. It's as true as anything can be." And with that declaration, he turned his attention back to his flowers, refusing any further conversation. The samurai stood at the gate for several more minutes, watching the master continue his gardening, trying to comprehend this strange interaction. Finally, shaking his head in confusion, he departed, leaving Master Sengai to his peculiar form of absence. As the Buddha understood, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This teaching relates profoundly to our modern struggle with the boundaries between availability and inner sanctuary, between social obligation and spiritual necessity. Why do we find it so difficult to establish clear boundaries around our inner availability, even when we are physically present? This story unveils our complex relationship with accessibility and the guilt we often feel about not being constantly available to others' needs and expectations. In our hyper-connected world, the pressure to be perpetually accessible has become overwhelming. Our phones buzz with constant demands for attention. Our email inboxes fill with urgent requests. Social media creates an expectation of immediate response and continuous engagement. We have lost the ancient wisdom of knowing when to be present and when to be out, regardless of our physical location. Master Sengai understood something profound about the nature of true availability. Being physically present doesn't automatically mean being internally available for meaningful interaction. Sometimes we need to be out from social engagement in order to be fully in with our inner work, our spiritual practice, or simply the restoration of our authentic self. This teaching also reveals our tendency to confuse physical presence with emotional or spiritual accessibility. How often do we assume that because someone is visible, they should automatically be available for our needs? How frequently do we ignore others' subtle signals that they need space simply because they haven't erected obvious barriers? Zen Master Yunmen taught, "Every day is a good day." This doesn't mean every day is appropriate for the same activities or interactions. Some days are good for engagement, others for solitude. Some moments call for availability, others for protective boundaries. Wisdom lies in recognizing which is needed when. We can observe this dynamic in countless modern situations. The parent who loves their children deeply but recognizes they need an hour of uninterrupted quiet time to remain emotionally available later. The artist who must protect their creative space from well-meaning friends who don't understand the delicate nature of inspiration. The spiritual practitioner who needs to establish boundaries around their meditation time, even if others consider it selfish or antisocial. The samurai's confusion reflects our cultural discomfort with boundaries that aren't immediately logical or convenient for others. We want people's availability to match our schedules and needs, rather than their own inner rhythms and requirements. When someone establishes a boundary that doesn't make sense to us, we often assume they're being arbitrary, unfriendly, or deceptive. This ancient wisdom illuminates another important distinction: the difference between isolation and conscious solitude. Master Sengai wasn't hiding from life or avoiding responsibility. He was claiming his right to be present with himself, to engage with his immediate environment, without the overlay of social interaction and conversation. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that availability is a moral obligation rather than a conscious choice. We feel guilty for not being constantly accessible, as if our worth depends on our willingness to interrupt our own needs for others' convenience. This creates a pattern of resentment and depletion that ultimately makes us less genuinely available when authentic connection is possible. The story also points us toward understanding the power of clear, simple boundaries. Master Sengai didn't offer elaborate explanations or justifications for his unavailability. He didn't apologize or make excuses. He simply stated a fact. Today he was out from social engagement, and this was as true and valid as any other truth. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with availability and boundaries, can you identify times when you might need to be out, even while physically present? What would it mean to honor your inner rhythms of engagement and solitude without guilt or extensive justification? The Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Part of this self-love involves knowing when to be available to others and when to be available to yourself, trusting that both forms of presence serve the greater good. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the paradox of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a renowned Zen master whose students achieved profound realization through diligent practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to transform his life, The young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with enthusiasm, he immediately sought an audience with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room overlooking a garden, where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute diligence and unwavering effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely, with the right approach, the process could be accelerated. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really, really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied without hesitation. By now, the student was completely bewildered and increasingly agitated. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, scholarship, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. "Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. "When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path," the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the paradox of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal fixation actually slow our spiritual development? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on attainment creates obstacles to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually cultivate awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument, not through anxious projection toward future competence. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping, that turns spiritual practice into a transaction. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to accumulate wisdom, or cultivate compassion to become better people, we're approaching the path as consumers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a fundamental split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This profound teaching points to the very heart of the Master's lesson. Zen is not something we attain, but something we recognize. It's not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom illuminates why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're frantically pursuing enlightenment, we're operating from the assumption that our present experience is somehow inadequate or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most profound insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the Master was pointing toward. That wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's error wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he proposed working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to flee. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called just sitting. Meditation without gaining mind, without agenda, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Consider how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing inspiration typically produces stilted results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. Let us continue on our journey with a tale of a master who discovered profound wisdom through childlike simplicity. This is the story of Great Fool, whose very name became his teaching. Yamamoto Yasuo lived as a prosperous scholar of ancient Japanese literature, respected for his expertise in classical poetry and his passionate devotion to traditional culture. Witnessing what he perceived as the decline of sacred values in his society, he wrote an impassioned book titled The Reality of the Gods, and ended his own life in protest, hoping to awaken others to what was being lost. He left behind substantial wealth and 5 children, 4 sons and 1 daughter, expecting his eldest son to inherit the family fortune and continue the family legacy. But the eldest son possessed a spirit that could not be contained by conventional expectations. The wealth, the social position, the scholarly reputation, none of these held any appeal for him. The young man looked at his inheritance and saw only golden chains that would bind him to a life his soul rejected. Without ceremony or explanation, he gave away everything his father had accumulated, changed his name to Great Fool, and set out to discover what lay beyond material security and social approval. At 22, this self-named fool began wandering in search of a true teacher. He had no money, no connections, no credentials, only a burning desire to understand the deepest truths of existence. After much searching, he found a Zen master who could guide him and threw himself into intensive study and practice. Within a few years of concentrated effort, he achieved the realization that had eluded him in his former life of comfort and learning. But instead of settling into the role of accomplished monk, Great Fool resumed his wandering. For more than 20 years, he traveled throughout the country, calling on various Zen masters to deepen and test his understanding. He sought not fame or position, but the continued polishing of his insight through contact with awakened beings. When he finally returned to his home province, Great Fool established himself in a humble hut. His appearance shocked those who remembered the wealthy young heir. He wore a robe made entirely of patches, survived on simple gruel, and owned only a single bowl which served every conceivable purpose. He used this one vessel for grinding bean paste, cooking his meager meals, and washing his hands and feet. To observers, he appeared to have lost everything of value. Yet Great Fool had discovered something precious that his former wealth could never have purchased. A love of pure genuineness that drew him irresistibly to children. Wherever he went, groups of children would gather around him for games of kickball and hide and seek. His delight in their company was infectious, and they responded to his presence with the natural trust that children reserve for those whose hearts are completely open. One day, during a game of hide and seek, Great Fool found his hiding place and closed his eyes, waiting to be discovered. But children being children, they eventually grew tired of the game and wandered home for dinner, completely forgetting about the monk hidden in their midst. Great Fool remained motionless in his hiding spot until nightfall, when a passerby discovered him and asked what he was doing. "I'm playing hide and seek with the children," Great Fool replied with perfect seriousness. "I'm waiting for someone to find me." The passerby explained that the children had gone home hours ago, but Great Fool showed no embarrassment at being left behind. He accepted this information with the same equanimity he brought to everything else, neither angry at the children for forgetting him, nor ashamed of his apparently foolish commitment to their game. When people asked why he spent so much time with children, Great Fool's answer was always the same. "I love their genuineness, their complete lack of falsehood." Despite his appearance of poverty and simplicity, Great Fool's calligraphy became famous throughout the region. Many wealthy patrons approached him with requests for his artistic work, offering substantial payments. But he had developed an uncanny ability to sense the motivation behind each request, accepting only when he felt the person's sincerity matched his own. Whenever children asked him to write something, anything, he would immediately take up his brush with joy, never refusing their requests regardless of how simple or seemingly meaningless. Great Fool often shared his philosophy with visitors. There are three things I very much dislike: the poetry of poets, the writing of writers, and the cuisine of cooks. By this he meant that when people become overly conscious of their skills and sophisticated in their techniques, they often lose the natural spontaneity that makes their work truly alive. The Buddha understood that in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. What emerges from Great Fool's story is the profound teaching that wisdom often requires us to become foolish by the world's standards in order to rediscover what authenticity actually means. Why do we lose touch with our natural genuineness as we mature? Zen Buddhism points to the ways that social conditioning gradually teaches us to perform ourselves rather than simply being ourselves. We learn to say what others want to hear, to present images that gain approval, to suppress spontaneous responses that might seem inappropriate or unsophisticated. Great Fool's attraction to children reveals something essential about enlightened consciousness. Children haven't yet learned to edit their responses for social acceptability. They express joy when they feel joyful, curiosity when something interests them, and affection without calculation. This unfiltered authenticity represents not immaturity, but a kind of wisdom that most adults spend lifetimes trying to recover. The single bowl that served all purposes becomes a beautiful metaphor for the unified simplicity that emerges when we stop dividing life into separate compartments. When we drop the artificial distinctions between sacred and mundane, proper and improper, sophisticated and simple, we discover that one open heart can meet every situation with appropriate response. His willingness to remain hidden while the children forgot about him demonstrates what Zen calls great patience, the capacity to be fully present to whatever is happening without needing it to be different. Most adults would have felt foolish and emerged from hiding place, but Great Fool's commitment to the game was absolute. His patience wasn't passive, but actively loving, trusting that staying true to his word mattered more than avoiding awkwardness. Consider your own relationship to sophistication and social appropriateness. How much energy do you spend crafting responses that will create the right impression rather than simply expressing what's true for you? What would shift if you trusted that your genuine responses, however simple or unpolished, might actually touch others more deeply than your carefully constructed presentations? Zen master Ikkyu taught, "That stone Buddha deserves all the bird droppings it gets." This points to the same truth Great Fool embodied, that real spirituality isn't about maintaining a pure, elevated image, but about remaining genuinely present to life as it actually unfolds, messiness and all. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's interactions, can you sense where you were performing yourself versus simply being yourself? Can you feel the difference between responding from calculation and responding from the childlike genuineness that Great Fool never lost? As the Buddha taught, if we could see the miracle of a single flower clearly, our whole life would change. The miracle lies not in complexity, but in the simple, direct encounter with what's actually present. Something children know naturally and adults must learn to remember. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the danger of spiritual expectations and the freedom found in ordinariness. This is the tale of a seeker who nearly missed enlightenment because he was looking for something extraordinary. In the garden of a modest Zen temple, morning sunlight filters through bamboo leaves as Master Bankei tends to his vegetables with the same careful attention he brings to meditation and teaching. His movements are unhurried and precise as he pulls weeds from around the young plants, his simple work clothes indistinguishable from those of any farmer or gardener. A man seeking spiritual instruction arrives at the temple gates, his eyes bright with the intensity of someone who has traveled far in search of wisdom. He has heard remarkable stories about Master Bankei's teachings and comes with great expectations of encountering someone obviously holy, perhaps surrounded by signs of spiritual power or emanating visible light. Seeing the gardener working among the vegetables, the seeker approaches and asks respectfully, "Excuse me, good sir, could you tell me where I might find the great Master Bankei? I have journeyed many days to receive his teachings." Bankei looks up from his work, soil still clinging to his hands, and smiles warmly. "Certainly," he says, gesturing toward the temple buildings. "If you go through that door there, you will find the master." The seeker bows his thanks and follows the indicated path, eager to finally meet the renowned teacher. Inside the temple, he discovers the same man he encountered in the garden, now seated in the master's traditional teaching position. The simple gardener and the great spiritual teacher are one and the same person. Confusion and indignation flare in the seeker's mind. This cannot be right. Great masters don't do common labor. Enlightened beings surely transcend mundane activities like weeding gardens. This ordinary-looking person cannot possibly be the extraordinary teacher he has sought. "Are you mocking me?" the seeker demands, his voice tight with offense. "Come down from that seat immediately. This is blasphemy. You show no respect for the true master. How dare you pretend to be someone so revered?" Master Bankei quietly rises from the teaching seat and settles himself on the floor with the same gentle awareness he had brought to his gardening. "Well," he says, with unchanged kindness, "this has created quite a difficulty. Now you won't find a Zen master in the chair anymore. The Buddha understood that if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that what we seek is often hidden by our expectations of how it should appear. Why do we struggle to recognize wisdom when it doesn't match our preconceptions? Buddhist psychology explains that our minds create elaborate images of how spiritual advancement should look. We expect enlightened people to be somehow separate from ordinary human experience, elevated above the mundane concerns that occupy our own lives. This spiritual materialism creates a dangerous divide between sacred and secular, special and ordinary, enlightened and unenlightened. We imagine that awakening transforms people into something other than human, rather than revealing the sacred nature of humanity itself. These expectations become barriers that prevent us from recognizing the very wisdom we claim to seek. The seeker's reaction reveals how deeply our conditioning shapes perception. Unable to reconcile his image of a great master with the reality of someone pulling weeds, he chose to reject the evidence of his senses rather than question his assumptions. His spiritual seeking had become so invested in finding something extraordinary that he couldn't accept the extraordinary nature of complete ordinariness. Master Bankei's response perfectly demonstrates the difference between being someone and being present. When challenged about his identity, he simply moved from the formal teaching position to sitting on the floor, showing that true authority doesn't depend on external arrangements, but on the quality of awareness brought to each moment. This points to what Zen calls nothing special. The recognition that enlightenment isn't an addition to our basic nature, but a subtraction of the illusions that obscure it. The gardener master wasn't playing roles. He was simply present with whatever activity life required, whether pulling weeds or offering teachings. Consider how often you might miss valuable guidance because it doesn't arrive in the expected package. Perhaps wisdom speaks through your child's innocent observation, your colleague's casual comment, or your own spontaneous insight during mundane activities. How many masters do we overlook because they appear too ordinary to take seriously? The Buddha taught, "Look within. You are the Buddha." This isn't metaphorical flattery, but practical instruction. The awakened nature we seek in others already exists within our own awareness, waiting to be recognized beneath our mental elaborations about what enlightenment should look like. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck reminded her students that spiritual practice isn't about becoming someone special, but about being willing to be completely ordinary. We are not trying to have special experiences, she taught, but to realize the specialness of all experience when met with clear awareness. The greatest spiritual trap may be the belief that awakening will make us different from who we fundamentally are. This creates endless seeking for transformation rather than recognition of what's already present. True spirituality often looks remarkably like wholehearted engagement with ordinary life. Master Bankei's gardening wasn't separate from his spiritual realization, but an expression of it. Pulling weeds with complete attention is no less sacred than sitting in meditation. Teaching profound truths is no more enlightened than tending vegetables with care and presence. Tonight, as you notice your expectations about how wisdom should appear, can you remain open to recognizing it in unexpected forms? Perhaps the guidance you're seeking is already present in the most ordinary moments of your life, waiting only for the humility to receive it, without requirements about how it should look. As the Buddha said, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, disguised as nothing special at all. Let us now turn to a story about generosity in the face of poverty and the profound recognition of what truly cannot be stolen. This is the moon in the window. Master Ryokan lived in conditions of voluntary simplicity that would have challenged even the most committed ascetic. His small mountain hut contained virtually no possessions, no treasures, no valuable objects, no accumulations of any kind that might tempt a thief or provide security for the future. His few belongings consisted only of the most basic necessities: worn robes, simple eating utensils, and perhaps a book or two for contemplation. On this particular evening, as Master Ryokan rested peacefully in his humble dwelling, a sneak thief approached through the darkness, believing he had found an easy target in what appeared to be an unguarded dwelling. The thief moved carefully, avoiding any sounds that might alert the occupant to his presence, and managed to slip inside the hut undetected. Once inside, however, the burglar quickly discovered the reality of the master's lifestyle. He searched methodically through the small space, examining every corner and crevice where valuables might be hidden, but found absolutely nothing worth stealing. There were no coins, no jewelry, no fine fabrics, no tools of value, nothing that could be easily carried away and converted into money or traded for necessities. The thief stood in the middle of the sparse room, frustrated and disappointed by this complete lack of anything worth taking. He had risked detection and potential punishment for what appeared to be a completely fruitless endeavor. After investing time and effort in this nocturnal enterprise, he was faced with the prospect of returning home empty-handed, with nothing to show for his criminal efforts. Just as the discouraged thief was preparing to leave in defeat, Master Ryokan's voice emerged gently from the darkness. Rather than shouting for help or expressing anger at this intrusion into his privacy, the master spoke with the kind of compassionate concern he might show toward any guest who was experiencing difficulty. "Wait," the master called softly. "Don't leave yet." The thief froze, expecting to be confronted, accused, or perhaps threatened with consequences for his attempted burglary. Instead, he watched in amazement as Master Ryokan quietly rose from his sleeping area and began removing the old cotton-quilted bedclothes that provided his warmth during the cool mountain nights. Without a word of reproach or any indication that he considered this intrusion a violation, the master folded his bedding carefully and offered it to the bewildered thief. "Here," he said simply. "Take this. You've come all this way and deserve something for your trouble." The thief accepted the unexpected gift in stunned silence, unsure how to respond to such extraordinary generosity from someone he had intended to rob. This was unlike any encounter with a victim he had ever experienced. The master's kindness left him speechless and somehow ashamed of his original intentions. As the confused burglar departed with the master's bedding, Master Ryokan stood in his doorway and noticed that the moon had risen over the eastern mountains, casting its serene light across the landscape. The beauty of this sight inspired him to compose a traditional waka poem that captured both his physical situation and his spiritual understanding. Left untouched by the thief in his haste, the moon in the window. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils a teaching about the difference between material wealth and true abundance, and the recognition that our deepest treasures cannot be taken by any external force. This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with possession, security, and the fear of loss that dominates so much of human experience. Master Ryokan's response to the thief reveals someone who understood that genuine wealth consists not in what we accumulate, but in our capacity for generosity, compassion, and appreciation of beauty that requires no ownership. The master's immediate impulse to give something to the disappointed thief demonstrates a revolutionary understanding of abundance. Rather than feeling victimized by someone who had tried to take from him, he experienced concern for someone who seemed to be in need. His poverty became a source of generosity rather than a reason for defensiveness or fear. Why do we typically respond to attempted theft with anger, outrage, and desire for punishment rather than compassion for the thief's desperation? This reaction stems from our identification with our possessions as extensions of ourselves, and our belief that being robbed somehow diminishes our worth or security. But Master Ryokan's response suggests a different relationship with material goods, one based on stewardship rather than attachment. His poem about the moon reveals the profound teaching at the heart of this story. The thief could take material objects, but could never steal the master's appreciation of beauty, his capacity for wonder, his ability to find joy in simple, natural phenomena. These internal treasures, peace, contentment, aesthetic sensitivity, remain completely beyond the reach of any external threat. The image of the moon in the window represents all the gifts that life offers freely to anyone with eyes to see them. Beauty, mystery, natural wonder, and the kind of wealth that increases rather than decreases when shared. The thief left with fabric that would eventually wear out, but the master retained access to beauty that would never diminish, and joy that no one could take away. This teaching reveals the difference between having and being. Material possessions require constant protection, can be lost or stolen, and often create more anxiety than genuine security. But the qualities of consciousness that Master Ryokan embodied, generosity, peace, appreciation, become stronger through expression rather than weaker through sharing. We can observe similar dynamics in our own relationship with loss and theft. When someone takes something from us, do we focus primarily on what we've lost, or on our capacity to respond with wisdom and compassion? Can we recognize opportunities to practice generosity even in situations that initially seem to call for defensive reactions? The story also points us toward understanding true security. Master Ryokan felt safe not because he had elaborate locks or security systems, but because he had nothing worth stealing in conventional terms and everything worth having in spiritual terms. His security came from inner abundance rather than external accumulation. Zen practice cultivates what might be called non-possessive appreciation, the ability to enjoy beauty and goodness without needing to own or control them. When we can appreciate the moon without needing to possess it, we access a form of wealth that no economic conditions can threaten. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that voluntary simplicity means deprivation or sacrifice. But Master Ryokan's story suggests the opposite, that reducing our attachment to material accumulation can actually increase our access to the forms of wealth that truly matter. His poverty became a gateway to generosity rather than a limitation on his capacity to give. The thief's hasty departure suggests that he recognized something in the master's response that challenged his entire framework for understanding value and security. Being met with kindness instead of anger, generosity instead of defensiveness, probably planted seeds that would continue growing long after he left the mountain hut. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the transformative power of unexpected responses. By meeting attempted theft with spontaneous giving, Master Ryokan created a moment of grace that had the potential to change not only the thief's immediate experience, but his entire understanding of human nature and the possibilities for positive interaction. Tonight, as you consider what you most fear losing and what you consider your greatest treasures, can you distinguish between the possessions that can be taken from you and the qualities of awareness that remain completely beyond any external threat? What would it mean to invest more energy in developing the kind of wealth that increases through sharing rather than decreases through loss? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The moon in the window represents the eternal treasures that remain available to anyone who has learned to let go of attachment while remaining open to the beauty and wonder that no thief can ever steal. Let us now explore a story about acceptance, natural cycles, and what true prosperity means. This is the teaching of the rich man and the master's blessing. A wealthy merchant had built a vast fortune through years of shrewd business dealings and careful investments. His family owned multiple properties, controlled trade routes, and wielded considerable influence throughout the region. As he aged, the merchant became increasingly concerned about ensuring his family's continued prosperity long after his death. Having heard of a renowned Zen master whose wisdom was said to transcend ordinary understanding, the merchant decided to commission something special. He approached the master with a request that seemed both generous and practical. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully while displaying his finest robes and jewelry, "I would like to commission you to write something profound that will encourage the prosperity of my family for generations to come. Something that my descendants can treasure and draw inspiration from long after I am gone. Money is no object. I simply want the most powerful blessing you can provide." The master listened quietly to this request, observing the merchant's obvious wealth and the sincere concern he felt for his family's future. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded his agreement and asked for a large piece of the finest paper. The merchant watched eagerly as the master prepared his brush and ink with ceremonial care. He expected elaborate calligraphy, perhaps ancient wisdom about accumulating wealth, or powerful mantras that would ensure his family's continued success in business and life. The master's reputation suggested that whatever he wrote would be both beautiful and profound. With simple, elegant strokes, the master wrote just 7 words. "Father dies, son dies, grandson dies." When the merchant read what had been written, his face flushed red with anger and disbelief. This was not at all what he had expected or requested. "Master!" he exclaimed, his voice rising with indignation. "I asked you to write something that would bring happiness and prosperity to my family for generations. Instead, you give me this depressing message about death. Why do you give me something so depressing like this?" The master looked at him with calm, compassionate eyes and began to explain the deeper meaning behind what might appear to be a morbid prediction. "Consider carefully what I have written," the master said gently. "If your son should die before you, this would bring unbearable grief to your family. Parents are not meant to outlive their children. Such loss creates a wound that never fully heals. If your grandson should die before your son, this too would bring tremendous sorrow to your family and disrupt the natural flow of life." The merchant began to listen more carefully, sensing there was something deeper in the master's words than he had initially understood. "But if your family continues, generation after generation, with each death occurring in the natural order I have described, this represents the ideal course of life. This is the pattern that brings the least suffering and the greatest harmony. This natural succession, where each generation has time to live fully before passing responsibility to the next, is true happiness and genuine prosperity." As the Buddha taught, of all things, impermanence is the most sacred. This ancient wisdom illuminates why accepting the natural order of life and death creates more genuine peace than any accumulation of material wealth ever could. Why do we resist the fundamental reality that all things, including our own lives and those of our loved ones, are temporary? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from fighting against impermanence rather than finding peace within its natural rhythms. The merchant's initial understanding of prosperity was limited to material accumulation, wealth, property, and influence that could be passed down through generations. But the master pointed to a deeper form of prosperity, the blessing of a family that experiences life and death in harmony with natural order rather than in tragic disruption of it. Consider how different our relationship to mortality becomes when we see death not as failure or tragedy, but as the natural conclusion of a life fully lived. The Master's blessing wasn't morbid. It was recognition that the greatest gift we can wish for our families is that each generation has the opportunity to live completely before making way for the next. This teaching also reveals the limitation of trying to control the future through accumulation of resources. The merchant wanted to ensure his family's prosperity through external means, but the Master suggested that true prosperity comes from accepting life's fundamental conditions rather than attempting to transcend them. In our modern context, we often measure family success by material legacy, the wealth we leave behind, the properties we pass down, the financial security we provide. But how often do we consider the emotional and spiritual legacy of a family that understands and accepts life's natural rhythms? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching reminds us that even while we work diligently to create good conditions for ourselves and our loved ones, the ultimate prosperity comes from understanding and accepting the temporary nature of all achievements. Look deeply at your own hopes and fears for your family's future. How much energy goes toward trying to control outcomes that are ultimately beyond our control? What would it mean to wish for your loved ones not immunity from life's natural processes, but wisdom and acceptance in meeting them? The Master's blessing contains a profound recognition. The alternative to natural order is not preservation, but tragedy. By wishing for the normal sequence of generational transition, he was wishing for the absence of the premature deaths and disrupted cycles that create the deepest forms of suffering. Tonight, as you consider what you most hope for your family and loved ones, can you remember the Master's wisdom? Can you see that the greatest blessing might not be the avoidance of mortality, but the grace to experience it in harmony with natural order? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The Master's 7 words brought the merchant face to face with the ultimate reality that no amount of wealth can change: our participation in the endless cycle of birth, life, and death that characterizes all existence. True prosperity lies not in escaping this cycle, but in dancing gracefully within it. Let us continue on our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. This is the tale of the 2 towns. In a bustling marketplace where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys, a wise Zen master had established a modest tea stall. People came not only for refreshment, but for the master's reputation for offering practical wisdom to those facing life's transitions and uncertainties. On this particular day, 2 different men approached the master's stall, each carrying the same question but embodying very different energies. Both were considering major life changes. Both were strangers to this place, and both sought guidance about whether this town might become their new home. The first man arrived with a tense expression, his shoulders carrying the weight of accumulated frustrations. As he approached the tea stall, his eyes darted around suspiciously, already assessing and finding fault with what he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he announced without preamble. "What's it like?" The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, noting not just his words, but the quality of energy he brought to the question. Rather than offering immediate description, the master asked his own question. "What was your old town like?" The first man's response came quickly, as if he had rehearsed these complaints many times. It was dreadful, he said with obvious bitterness. Everyone was hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors were inconsiderate, the shopkeepers were rude, and the whole place was full of selfish, unpleasant people. I couldn't stand it there anymore. The master nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining compassionate despite the negativity pouring from his visitor. This town is very much the same, he replied simply. I don't think you should move here. The first man's face darkened with disappointment and frustration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath about how this place was probably just as bad as everywhere else. Shortly after the first man departed, the second traveler approached the tea stall. His manner was notably different, relaxed, curious, and open. His eyes took in the surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the master, it seemed to come from a place of genuine warmth. I'm thinking of moving to this town, he said cheerfully. What's it like? The master regarded this second visitor with the same careful attention he had given the first, again choosing to learn more before offering his assessment. What was your old town like? He asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question. It was wonderful, he said with obvious fondness. Everyone was so friendly and helpful. My neighbors looked out for each other. The local merchants knew everyone by name, and there was a real sense of community. I was very happy there. I'm only considering a change because I'm looking for new adventures and opportunities. The master smiled knowingly. This town is very much the same, he told the second man. I think you will like it here very much. The second man's face broke into a delighted grin. He thanked the master warmly and walked away with a spring in his step, already seeing possibilities and connections in his new environment. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This ancient insight illuminates the profound truth demonstrated by the master's seemingly contradictory responses to the two travelers. Here, we discover one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. The master gave identical answers to both men because he recognized that their questions revealed far more about their internal states than about their external circumstances. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and disappointment in the same environments? Buddhist psychology explains that our perceptual filters, shaped by our habitual mental patterns, literally create our experienced reality. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out information that contradicts them. The first man carried what modern psychology might call a negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative possible way. His mind was like a magnet for negative experiences, not because the world was inherently hostile, but because that's what he was conditioned to see. The second man demonstrated the opposite pattern, a generous attribution style that assumed the best in others and looked for positive connections. His mind was attuned to kindness and possibility. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Two people can work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere. The other finds mentorship, collaboration, and growth opportunities in the same environment. This doesn't mean that objective conditions don't matter, or that all experiences are equally positive. Rather, it points to the enormous influence our mental habits have on shaping our lived reality. As Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, wherever you go, there you are. We carry our internal weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter. The master's wisdom lay in recognizing that no external change of location could solve the first man's problem. If he moved to this town with the same negative perceptual filters, he would recreate the same disappointing experiences he was trying to escape. This insight has profound implications for how we approach life changes and problem solving. Often, when we're unhappy with our circumstances, our first instinct is to change the external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that created our dissatisfaction, we simply recreate similar problems in new settings. But this principle works in both directions. When we cultivate mental habits of appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we begin to notice more evidence supporting those perspectives. The world doesn't magically change, but our capacity to see its positive qualities expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of community, work, and relationships, can you notice the interpretive lens through which you typically view these interactions? Are you more like the first traveler, scanning for problems and disappointments, or the second, looking for connection and possibility? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing the quality of awareness we bring to whatever circumstances we encounter. Let us explore a story about the difference between true compassion and religious display. This is the temple gate. In ancient Japan, there lived a wealthy merchant named Heizayamon, whose heart overflowed with genuine concern for human suffering. Unlike many men of wealth who hoarded their fortunes, he spent his days seeking out opportunities to ease the pain of others. When winter brought hunger to poor families, Heizayamon ensured their children had rice. When floods washed away bridges, he funded their reconstruction. When illness struck the elderly with no one to care for them, his resources provided medicine and comfort. His generosity was not the calculated charity of one seeking public recognition, but the natural response of a heart that could not bear to witness suffering. Villagers throughout the province knew his kindness, and his reputation for selfless benevolence spread far beyond his hometown. Even in his final will, Heizayamon directed that his wealth continue serving those in need long after his death, a legacy his children honored faithfully. One autumn morning, a Buddhist friar appeared at Heizayamon's door. The monk's robes were fine, his manner polished, and his request carefully rehearsed. "Honorable sir," the friar began with elaborate bows, "I have heard of your magnificent charitable works. Our temple requires a grand gate to properly welcome worshippers and display our devotion to the Buddha. Such a structure would bring great merit to your name and ensure your place in paradise." Heizayamon listened quietly, studying the monk's earnest face. When the friar finished his eloquent appeal, the merchant began to laugh, not mockingly, but with the gentle amusement of one who sees clearly through pretense. "Venerable monk," he replied, "I help people because I cannot bear to see them suffer. Tell me, what suffering does a temple without a gate endure? What pain does an absent gate cause the Buddha?" The friar sputtered, unprepared for such directness. "But sir, a temple gate shows respect, demonstrates our prosperity, attracts more followers." "Ah," said Heizayamon, still smiling. "So this gate would serve the temple's image, not reduce anyone's suffering. When children go hungry, while monks seek ornamental gates, which serves the Buddha's teachings better, feeding the children or building the gate?" The monk departed empty-handed, perhaps carrying with him a lesson more valuable than any donation. The Buddha once said, "If you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with wrongful deeds." This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between authentic compassion and spiritual theatre. True service to others flows naturally from understanding our interconnectedness, while religious display often serves only our ego's desire for recognition and status. Why do we sometimes confuse religious ceremony with spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that lead us astray from genuine compassion. We often become attached to the forms of spirituality rather than its essence. Like the monk seeking a gate, we can become so focused on the external symbols of devotion that we lose sight of their purpose. A beautiful temple may inspire reverence, but it serves little purpose if our hearts remain closed to suffering around us. We also fall into the trap of performative spirituality, practicing religion to be seen as religious rather than to reduce suffering and cultivate wisdom. This might manifest as elaborate rituals while ignoring simple acts of kindness, or seeking recognition for charitable donations while remaining blind to daily opportunities for compassion. Additionally, our minds often complicate what is simple. The Buddha's teachings point toward reducing suffering, yet we create elaborate theological structures that can obscure this fundamental truth. Like building ornate gates while children starve, we sometimes invest in spiritual complexity while overlooking basic human needs right before us. Consider how this pattern appears in modern life. We might donate to distant charities while remaining indifferent to our neighbors' struggles. We may attend religious services weekly while treating service workers harshly. We could meditate for hours while speaking unkindly to family members. These contradictions reveal how easily we separate spiritual practice from compassionate action. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." When we approach spirituality with a beginner's mind, we see suffering clearly and respond naturally. When we become experts in religious forms, we might lose sight of their purpose entirely. The heart of this teaching lies in recognizing that authentic spiritual practice always serves love and reduces suffering. Any religious activity that increases separation, judgment, or self-importance moves us away from the Buddha's path, regardless of how traditional or elaborate it may be. This doesn't mean religious ceremonies lack value, but rather that their worth lies in how they open our hearts and inspire compassionate action. A temple gate serves the Buddha when it welcomes all beings equally, not when it displays the temple's wealth while others go without basic needs. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." When our spiritual practices increase our capacity for love and decrease our tendency toward judgment, they serve their true purpose. When they become opportunities for display or self-aggrandizement, they move us away from awakening. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual practices, can you discern between actions that truly serve compassion and those that might serve your ego? Where in your life might you be building ornamental gates while overlooking genuine opportunities to reduce suffering? As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to honor authentic values even when offered attractive alternatives. This is the story of the philosopher Chuang-Tzu and his encounter with worldly temptation. Beside the banks of a gentle river, where clear water flows over smooth stones and willows trail their branches in the current, the great Taoist sage Chuang-Tzu sits in quiet contemplation. The afternoon sun warms his simple robes as he watches the water's endless movement, finding in its ceaseless flow a reflection of the Tao's constant becoming. His mind rests in the natural rhythm of the moment, unencumbered by ambition or the need to be anywhere other than exactly where he is. The peaceful scene is interrupted by the approach of an elaborately dressed official, whose silk garments and formal bearing announce his connection to the royal court. This representative of the prince has traveled far to find the renowned philosopher, carrying with him an offer that most people would consider the opportunity of a lifetime. Master Chuang-Tzu, the official begins with respectful ceremony. His Royal Highness has heard of your great wisdom and wishes to invite you to serve as an advisor in his court. You would be offered a position of tremendous influence, surrounded by luxury, honored by the kingdom's most educated citizens. Your insights would shape important decisions affecting thousands of people. This is a rare privilege that comes to very few. Chuang-Tzu continues watching the river as if he hasn't heard the magnificent offer. The water continues its ancient conversation with the stones, completely indifferent to human ambitions and social hierarchies. Fish move in the depths according to their own purposes, neither seeking advancement nor fearing obscurity. After a long silence, during which the official begins to wonder if the sage is perhaps deaf or lost in meditation too deep for interruption, Chuang-Tzu speaks thoughtfully. "I have heard," he says, still gazing at the flowing water, "that the prince possesses a sacred turtle shell, one that is 2,000 years old. This treasure is kept in the palace, carefully wrapped in the finest silk and precious brocades, housed in an ornate box, and honored as one of the kingdom's most valuable relics." The official nods eagerly, pleased that the conversation seems to be moving toward acceptance of the court position. Yes, that is perfectly true. The sacred turtle is indeed among our most prized possessions, treated with the reverence due to such an ancient and spiritually significant object. Chuang-Tzu turns his attention from the river to look directly at the court representative. "Tell me," he asks with genuine curiosity, "if that turtle could choose its fate, what do you think it would prefer? To be dead and honored in the palace, wrapped in silk and venerated for its shell, or to be alive in this mud, dragging its tail behind it as it moves freely through its natural habitat?" The official considers this strange question seriously. Despite its oddness, the answer seems obvious. Well, naturally, it would prefer to be alive and free in the mud rather than dead and honored in the palace, no matter how great the reverence shown to its remains. Chuang-Tzu smiles with gentle finality. "I, too, prefer to drag my tail in the mud. Good day to you, honored sir." The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." This ancient wisdom illuminates the choice between authentic expression and attractive performance that confronts everyone seeking to live with integrity. Why do we sometimes feel torn between opportunities that promise external validation and paths that honor our inner truth? Buddhist psychology reveals that the ego constructs elaborate fantasies about how recognition, status, and influence will fulfill our deepest needs. These fantasies can become so compelling that we lose touch with what actually nourishes our spirit. Chuang-Tzu's response demonstrates what Taoists call following the natural way, making choices based on authentic nature rather than conditioned desires for advancement. His life beside the river, contemplating the Tao through direct observation of natural processes, provided exactly the kind of engagement that suited his temperament and purpose. The court position represented everything our achievement-oriented culture teaches us to value: prestige, influence, comfort, and social recognition. Yet the sage recognized that accepting such a role would require him to become someone fundamentally different from who he was, essentially dying to his authentic self in order to be honored as something else. This story speaks directly to anyone who has faced pressure to pursue opportunities that feel misaligned with their deeper calling. Perhaps it's a career advancement that would require compromising personal values. Maybe it's a social circle that offers status but demands constant performance. Possibly it's a lifestyle that provides security but stifles creative expression. The turtle metaphor reveals the hidden cost of pursuing external validation at the expense of authentic living. We can become so invested in how others perceive our achievements that we lose connection with our own experience of aliveness. The honored turtle shell represents any success that requires us to sacrifice our essential vitality. Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah often reminded his students that true happiness comes from reducing desires rather than fulfilling them. We suffer, he taught, not because we don't have enough, but because we want too much. Chuang-Tzu's Contentment beside the river embodied this principle perfectly. The sage's choice also illustrates profound trust in what Taoists call wu-wei, action in harmony with natural flow rather than forced effort toward predetermined goals. His life unfolded according to organic rhythms rather than strategic planning, allowing him to respond spontaneously to each moment's authentic requirements. This doesn't mean we should reject all opportunities for growth or service, but rather that we should evaluate them based on whether they allow our authentic nature to express itself more fully. Some people are genuinely called to positions of influence and responsibility. Others serve life most effectively through quieter, less visible contributions. The deeper teaching here concerns the difference between following external expectations and honoring internal guidance. Our consumer culture constantly suggests that happiness lies in acquiring more status, more recognition, more influence, more stuff. But wisdom traditions consistently point toward contentment arising from alignment with our true nature. Master Linji taught his students to become people of no rank, those who don't define themselves through social positions, but through the quality of presence they bring to each moment. This freedom from needing to be somebody special, paradoxically, allows our genuine gifts to emerge more naturally. Chuang-Tzu's riverside contemplation represents any activity that connects us with sources of meaning deeper than social validation. For some, this might be artistic expression, spending time in nature, or simple acts of service. For others, it could be raising children, building things with their hands, or engaging in spiritual practice. Tonight, as you consider the various opportunities and pressures in your own life, can you distinguish between what your ego thinks you should want and what your deeper wisdom actually values? Perhaps you'll discover that the most fulfilling path involves trusting your authentic nature rather than pursuing what others believe will make you happy. As the Buddha taught, your work is to discover your work and then with all your heart to give yourself to it. Sometimes our true work looks remarkably like dragging our tail in the mud, and sometimes that's exactly where we belong. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distractions started to subside, his body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. Let us now turn to a story about the most profound spiritual truth hiding in the most obvious place. This is the dialogue between Joshu and Nansen about the ordinary mind. In a quiet mountain monastery where morning mist drifted between ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across distant valleys, two masters engaged in a conversation that would illuminate the very heart of Zen understanding. Joshu, despite his own considerable wisdom and years of practice, approached his teacher Nansen with the earnestness of a sincere student seeking to understand the deepest mysteries of existence. The two men sat facing each other in the temple's meditation hall, where countless seekers before them had wrestled with the same fundamental questions about the nature of awakening. Joshu's inquiry came from a place of genuine perplexity. After years of intensive practice, meditation and study, he still felt uncertain about the very foundation of the spiritual path. "Master," Joshu began with characteristic directness, "what exactly is the way? With all our practices and teachings, what are we ultimately seeking?" Nansen's response was immediate and surprisingly simple. "Ordinary mind is the way," he replied, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. This answer clearly puzzled Joshu, who had expected something more esoteric, more complex, more removed from everyday experience. "If ordinary mind is the way," he pressed further, "then should we direct ourselves toward cultivating it? Should we make it our spiritual goal?" Nansen shook his head gently. "If you direct yourself toward it, you immediately go away from it," he explained. "The very effort to attain ordinary mind makes it extraordinary, and therefore no longer ordinary." Now Joshu found himself in what seemed like an impossible logical bind. "But Master, if we don't try to cultivate or attain anything, how can we ever know that this ordinary mind is actually the way? How can we recognize it without some form of practice or effort?" Nansen's final response cut through all philosophical complexity with razor-sharp clarity. The way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing turns the way into a concept, an object of understanding, which is illusion. Not knowing turns it into blankness, which misses its vibrant presence. If you truly realize the way without doubt, it becomes like the great void, so vast and boundless that it contains everything. How then could there be any distinction between right and wrong, sacred and mundane, ordinary and extraordinary? At these words, something shifted fundamentally in Joshu's understanding. The seeking mind that had been grasping for answers suddenly relaxed, and he experienced a moment of complete clarity. Not the clarity of understanding something new, but the clarity of recognizing what had been present all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, there is nothing to seek and nothing to find. Everything is already here. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that what we seek through spiritual practice is not some special state of consciousness, but rather the ordinary awareness that is reading these words right now. Why do we struggle to accept that ordinary mind is the way? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning that spiritual truth must be extraordinary, mystical, or dramatically different from our everyday experience. We imagine enlightenment as a permanent state of bliss, cosmic consciousness, or supernatural abilities, when in reality, it is simply the natural state of awareness without the overlay of seeking and striving. Our spiritual seeking often becomes its own obstacle. Like a person frantically searching for glasses while wearing them, we exhaust ourselves looking for something we already possess. The very effort to attain a special spiritual state creates the sense of separation between seeker and sought, between the ordinary self and some idealized, awakened self. Consider how your own mind works in this very moment. Thoughts arise and pass away. Sensations appear in your body. Sounds reach your ears. Emotions flow through your awareness. This natural functioning of consciousness, without any special effort or concentration, is what Nansen calls ordinary mind. It is already enlightened, not because it achieves some particular state, but because it is the very space in which all states appear and dissolve. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way, just like now, without seeking anything, without grasping after the fruits of Zen, just this mind that thinks and feels and perceives. This is Buddha. This ordinariness is precisely what makes it so difficult to recognize. We keep looking past it for something more impressive. The great void that Nansen mentions is not empty space, but rather the spacious awareness in which all experiences arise. Like the sky that remains unchanged whether filled with clouds or clear, this awareness remains constant through all the changing contents of experience. Joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, peace and agitation, all appear and disappear within this unchanging background of ordinary awareness. This understanding revolutionizes our approach to spiritual practice. Instead of trying to achieve some special state, we learn to recognize the awareness that is already present. Instead of seeking to transcend ordinary experience, we discover the extraordinary nature of ordinariness itself. The sound of rain becomes as sacred as temple bells. Washing dishes becomes as profound as formal meditation. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. This appreciation for the ordinary and imperfect reflects the same understanding that Nansen points toward. The way is not found in perfected states, but in the natural flow of life exactly as it is. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being aware of these words, aware of your breathing, aware of the sounds around you, can you recognize this ordinary awareness as what you have been seeking all along? Can you relax the effort to become something other than what you already are? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The way is not a destination to reach, but the very ground you are already standing on. In accepting your ordinary mind as Buddha mind, you discover that the spiritual journey was never about going somewhere else, but about recognizing where you have always been. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a teaching about the profound difference between passive surrender and active compassion. This is the parable of the lion and the fox. In a land where drought had lasted many months and both humans and animals struggled to find sustenance, there lived a man whose heart burned with spiritual longing. Every day he prayed with desperate intensity, asking for the awareness and wisdom that would bring success to his life. His prayers were sincere, but filled with anxiety, for he had tried many approaches to prosperity, various jobs, different strategies, numerous plans, yet nothing had brought him the security and fulfillment he sought. His frustration grew as his resources dwindled and his situation became increasingly precarious. There must be some secret to life that I'm missing, he thought. Some spiritual principle that, once understood, will unlock the doors to abundance and peace. One night, after hours of fervent prayer, he fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In his dream, a voice spoke to him with crystal clarity. "Go into the forest tomorrow morning. There you will find the understanding you seek." The man woke with his heart pounding with excitement and hope. This felt different from ordinary dreams. The voice had carried such authority, such certainty. Without delay, he prepared simple provisions and set out at first light for the ancient forest that bordered his village. For several hours, he wandered among towering trees and winding paths, his eyes searching for some sign, some teacher, some revelation that would provide the answers to his prayers. The morning air was cool and fragrant with wildflowers, but his anxiety made it difficult to appreciate the natural beauty surrounding him. As midday heat began to build, exhaustion forced him to rest beside a small stream. He sat on a smooth boulder, wondering if he had misunderstood the dream's message, when movement caught his eye between two large rocks in a shaded alcove nearby. To his amazement, he discovered a fox lying peacefully in the cool space. But this fox had no legs. Where its limbs should have been, there were only healed scars. Yet the animal appeared calm and well-nourished rather than starving or distressed as he would have expected. How extraordinary, the man thought. How does a creature with no ability to hunt or forage manage to survive in the wilderness? Curious and sensing this might be connected to his spiritual quest, he concealed himself and waited to see what would happen. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden light, he heard heavy footsteps approaching through the underbrush. A magnificent lion emerged into the clearing, carrying fresh meat in its powerful jaws. Without any apparent reason or expectation of return, the lion gently placed the meat directly in front of the legless fox and then disappeared back into the forest. The man's heart leaped with understanding. "Ah," he exclaimed silently, "now I see the secret to success in life. The answer is complete surrender and trust. I don't need to struggle and strive and worry about providing for myself. All I need to do is have faith that the universe will take care of all my needs. God will provide everything, just as the lion provides for the fox. My role is simply to trust and receive." Filled with this new spiritual insight, the man returned home and immediately began practicing what he believed he had learned. He stopped seeking work, stopped making efforts to improve his situation, and instead spent his days in prayer and meditation, waiting for providence to supply his needs as it had for the legless fox. Days passed, then weeks. His food stores depleted, his strength began to fade, and his situation became desperate. Yet he maintained his faith that his surrender would be rewarded, that his trust would be vindicated by divine intervention. 2 weeks into this experiment, weak from hunger and beginning to doubt his interpretation, the man had another vivid dream. The same authoritative voice that had sent him to the forest now spoke again, but this time with a tone of gentle correction. "Fool," the voice said, not with cruelty, but with compassionate clarity. "Be like the lion, not like the fox." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." The story points us toward understanding the profound difference between spiritual surrender and spiritual service. Why do we sometimes mistake passivity for spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind often seeks the path of least resistance, preferring to receive rather than give, to be cared for rather than to care for others. True surrender involves releasing our attachment to outcomes while maintaining wholehearted engagement with compassionate action. The man's initial interpretation represented a common spiritual misunderstanding, the belief that faith means waiting for external forces to solve our problems. But genuine spiritual maturity involves recognizing our responsibility to be the hands and heart through which compassion flows into the world. Look deeply at your own relationship to giving and receiving. Are there areas where you've been waiting for others to provide what you could offer yourself? Perhaps waiting for someone else to create the community you long for, to start the project you've envisioned, or to show the kindness you wish to see in the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between victim consciousness and co-creator consciousness. The fox, through no choice of its own, required care and received it through the lion's generosity. But humans possess capacities the fox lacks: intelligence, creativity, the ability to plan and provide not only for ourselves, but for others who truly cannot provide for themselves. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual awakening doesn't exempt us from worldly responsibility, but transforms how we engage with it. True faith isn't passive waiting, but active participation in the web of interdependence that connects all beings. We are called to be both lion and fox, receiving grace when we genuinely need it, offering strength when others require our support. Consider the people in your life who might be in the fox's position through circumstances beyond their control: illness, age, disability, or temporary crisis. And consider the areas where you have lion-like capacities, skills, resources, energy, or opportunities that could serve others' well-being. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." This teaching points toward the natural movement from self-preoccupation to selfless service that marks spiritual maturity. The man's transformation from seeking to be cared for to recognizing his calling to care for others represents the shift from spiritual materialism to genuine Dharma practice. Instead of using spirituality to get what we want, we begin using our gifts to give what others need. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, the aspiration to work for the liberation of all beings, rather than seeking only our own comfort and security. This doesn't mean we neglect our genuine needs, but that we hold them within the larger context of universal well-being. The Buddha said, "If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path." Often, the success and fulfillment we seek comes not through focusing on our own needs, but through dedicating ourselves to serving something greater than our personal concerns. This teaching challenges us to examine our motivations for spiritual practice itself. Are we seeking enlightenment as a form of ultimate self-improvement? Or are we cultivating wisdom and compassion to better serve the world's needs? Are we praying for divine provision? Or are we asking how we can become instruments of provision for others? The voice in the dream offered correction with love, not condemnation. The man's initial misunderstanding was part of his learning process, not a spiritual failure. Sometimes we need to experience our own helplessness before we can understand our power to help others. Tonight, as you consider the gifts and capacities you've been given, can you sense how they might be intended, not just for your own security, but for the welfare of others? Can you feel the difference between spiritual seeking that focuses on what you can get and spiritual practice that asks what you can give? As the Buddha taught, in caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others. The lion's generous feeding of the fox represents the natural flow of compassion that arises when we recognize our fundamental interconnection. By being the lion when we can, we ensure that others will be lions for us when we truly need their care. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of innocence and how genuine gratitude can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. This is The Kind Ferryman. At a remote river crossing where the current ran swift and dangerous, there operated a notorious ferryman whose reputation for violence and lawlessness was known throughout the region. This outlaw had chosen his profession not from any desire to serve travelers, but because the isolated location provided perfect opportunities for robbery and worse. Travelers who needed to cross the water had no alternative but to trust themselves to his boat, making them vulnerable to whatever intentions he might harbor. The ferryman had heard of Master Ryokan's reputation for gentleness and complete absence of any capacity for violence or resistance. Unlike the merchants and officials who sometimes crossed his river, people who might be armed or who could pose some threat if provoked. This humble monk represented what appeared to be an easy and risk-free target for whatever mischief the boatman might have in mind. When Master Ryokan approached the river crossing, seeking safe passage to continue his spiritual journey, the ferryman agreed to take him aboard with the hidden intention of amusing himself at the monk's expense. He helped the master into his boat with false courtesy, concealing his malicious plans behind a facade of helpful service. Once they had moved away from the shore and were in the middle of the river, where the current was strongest and the master would be completely helpless, the ferryman began implementing his cruel entertainment. He started deliberately rocking the boat violently from side to side, creating dangerous instability that threatened to overturn the vessel entirely. The boat pitched wildly in the swift current, water splashing over the sides as the ferryman used his knowledge of the river and his physical strength to create maximum terror for his passenger. His intention was clear. He wanted to see this peaceful monk panic, beg for mercy, perhaps even break down in fear as he faced the prospect of drowning in the turbulent water. But Master Ryokan's response was not what the ferryman expected. Instead of crying out in fear or pleading for his life, the master simply endured the violent rocking with the same serene acceptance he brought to all of life's challenges. He neither struggled nor protested, showing no sign of the terror the ferryman had hoped to provoke. When the dangerous rocking failed to produce the desired reaction of panic and desperation, the ferryman escalated his assault. He deliberately tumbled Master Ryokan into the cold, swift-moving river, expecting to watch the monk struggle desperately in the water before being swept away by the strong current. But the master, though clearly not a strong swimmer, made no dramatic attempts to save himself through violent struggling against the river's power. His response to being thrown into the water was the same calm acceptance he had shown to the boat's rocking. He neither fought frantically against the current nor screamed for help, but simply allowed the water to carry him as it would. Watching this peaceful acceptance, the ferryman suddenly became alarmed. What had begun as cruel entertainment was transforming into something far more serious. The master was indeed in danger of drowning, and his complete lack of resistance or self-preservation instincts made his situation truly perilous rather than merely frightening. The ferryman's cruel amusement instantly transformed into genuine concern. Rushing to Master Ryokan's aid, he plucked the gentle monk from the water and pulled him safely back into the boat, using all his river skills to rescue someone he had just moments before been trying to terrify. Once the master was safely back in the vessel, dripping but unharmed, the ferryman expected anger, accusations, or at least some acknowledgement of the deliberate cruelty he had just inflicted. Instead, Master Ryokan looked at his rescuer with eyes full of sincere gratitude and profound appreciation. "Thank you," the master said with complete sincerity, bowing deeply to the bewildered ferryman. "Thank you for your act of selfless kindness in saving my life. Your compassion and quick action prevented me from drowning." The ferryman stood speechless, realizing that Master Ryokan genuinely believed he had been saved by a good Samaritan rather than rescued by his own tormentor. The master's innocence and gratitude were so complete that he saw only kindness where cruel intention had existed moments before. Buddha's wisdom tells us, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how genuine innocence and gratitude can transform the very nature of our interactions, turning potential enemies into unexpected benefactors. This tale unveils something revolutionary about the power of perception to transform reality itself. Master Ryokan's complete innocence and genuine gratitude created a situation where the ferryman's malicious intentions became irrelevant compared to the actual outcome. A life-saving rescue that deserved acknowledgement regardless of the rescuer's original motivations. The Master's response reveals a profound teaching about the difference between naive ignorance and conscious innocence. He wasn't simply unaware of the ferryman's cruel intentions. He chose to respond to what actually happened, being saved from drowning, rather than to the malicious motivations that had created the dangerous situation in the first place. Why do we typically focus on people's negative intentions rather than on whatever positive outcomes might emerge from their actions? This tendency reflects our investment in being right about others' badness, rather than our commitment to recognizing genuine opportunities for gratitude and connection. We often prefer being justified in our anger to finding reasons for appreciation. The ferryman's transformation from tormentor to rescuer demonstrates how quickly situations can shift when met with unexpected responses. His alarm at seeing the master in genuine danger revealed compassionate instincts that his cruel entertainment had temporarily suppressed. Master Ryokan's innocence created space for these better impulses to emerge naturally. This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with forgiveness and the power of choosing which aspects of complex situations to emphasize. The master could have focused on being deliberately thrown into the river, but instead he focused entirely on being pulled out of it. His choice of emphasis determined not only his own emotional state, but also the ferryman's understanding of who he was capable of being. The story reveals the difference between conditional and unconditional gratitude. Conditional gratitude depends on pure motivations and perfect circumstances. We're grateful only when people help us from completely altruistic intentions. But Master Ryokan demonstrated unconditional gratitude, appreciation for beneficial outcomes regardless of the complex motivations that might have preceded them. We can observe similar opportunities for transformative responses in many situations where people's mixed motivations create both harm and benefit. The co-worker who criticizes us publicly, but whose feedback actually helps us improve our performance. The family member who creates drama, but also provides genuine support during crises. The challenging relationship that causes pain, but also catalyzes important personal growth. This teaching also points us toward understanding the creative power of innocent interpretation. By seeing the ferryman as his rescuer rather than his tormentor, Master Ryokan offered him an identity upgrade that had the potential to influence all his future behavior. Sometimes, people become what we genuinely see them as being. Zen practice cultivates what might be called selective attention. Not denial of difficult realities, but conscious choice about which aspects of complex situations deserve our primary focus and response. When we can emphasize the helpful rather than the harmful, we often create conditions for more helpful behavior to continue emerging. The ferryman's speechlessness at receiving gratitude instead of accusations reveals how profoundly we can be affected by encountering responses that don't match our expectations. Master Ryokan's innocence created a moment of grace that challenged everything the outlaw thought he knew about how victims respond to perpetrators. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual practice should make us more discerning about others' negative motivations. But this story suggests that sometimes wisdom involves seeing through negative intentions to focus on positive outcomes and possibilities for genuine connection. This story also reveals the power of gratitude to transform our own experience of difficult situations. By choosing to focus on being rescued rather than on being attacked, Master Ryokan avoided the suffering that comes from dwelling on others' harmful intentions, while fully receiving the benefit of whatever help became available. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the courage required for sustained innocence in a world where cynicism and suspicion are often justified by experience. Master Ryokan's response required tremendous inner strength, not naivety, but the conscious choice to meet each moment with openness rather than defensive interpretation. Tonight, as you consider relationships or situations where people's mixed motivations have created both harm and benefit, can you experiment with Master Ryokan's selective focus on whatever helpful outcomes have emerged? What would it mean to express genuine gratitude for assistance received, regardless of the complex intentions that might have preceded it? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Through conscious innocence and genuine gratitude, we discover the capacity to transform potential enemies into unexpected sources of grace, creating possibilities for connection and growth that judgment and accusation can never provide. Let us now turn to a tale of profound simplicity and mysterious contentment. This is the stone robe. In the mountains near the great teacher Hakuin's temple lived a monk whose real name has been lost to history. The local villagers knew him only as the Stone Robe Monk, a title that spoke to both his poverty and his ingenious adaptation to life's challenges. This solitary master owned virtually nothing. His hut contained no furniture, no decorations, no comforts of any kind. Most remarkably, he possessed no robe, an almost unthinkable condition for a Buddhist monk. Where other monks wore flowing robes that marked their status and provided warmth, the Stone Robe Monk wrapped only his own skin against the elements. On the coldest mountain nights, when frost covered the ground and wind howled through the peaks, the monk had devised a unique solution. He would pick up a heavy stone and carry it around his small hut, walking in slow, deliberate circles until the effort of carrying the rock generated enough body heat to warm him. Round and round he would pace, the stone tight against his chest, his breath visible in the frigid air, until warmth spread through his limbs. The villagers who occasionally glimpsed him during these midnight walks were both puzzled and moved by the sight. Here was a man who had found a way to transform the very hardship of his poverty into a practice. The stone that others might see as a burden became his provider of comfort. The cold that might drive others to despair became an opportunity for simple, effective action. From time to time, the Stone Robe Monk would visit Master Hakuin, appearing at the temple like a figure from another era. The two masters would sit together, sharing the wordless communication that flows between those who have touched the deepest truths. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, the Stone Robe Monk would disappear back into the mountains. One day, he simply vanished entirely, No one knows where he went or how he died. But the stone he carried on those cold nights still sits in front of his abandoned hut, weathered by countless seasons, a silent testament to a life lived with extraordinary contentment in the face of extraordinary simplicity. The Buddha understood that health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship. The deeper teaching here shows us that true wealth has nothing to do with material possession and everything to do with our relationship to whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. Why do we struggle to find contentment with simplicity? Our conditioning teaches us that comfort must come from external sources: warmer clothes, better shelter, more possessions, improved circumstances. The stone-robed monk discovered something radically different. That resourcefulness born from acceptance can transform any limitation into workable wisdom. This tale unveils the profound difference between poverty of spirit and voluntary simplicity. Poverty of spirit involves feeling victimized by our circumstances, resentful of what we lack, constantly comparing our situation to others who have more. Voluntary simplicity, even when circumstances are difficult, involves a fundamental acceptance that finds creative ways to meet challenges without complaint or self-pity. The stone in this story represents what Zen calls skillful means, the creative adaptation that emerges when we stop arguing with reality and start working with it. Instead of lamenting his lack of a warm robe, the monk found another way to generate warmth. Instead of viewing the stone as an inconvenience, he recognized it as a resource. This is the genius of acceptance. It frees our creative energy from resistance and channeling it toward practical solutions. Consider the stones in your own life, the limitations, inconveniences, or challenges that you might habitually resist. What would shift if you approached these not as problems to be solved or obstacles to be overcome, but as raw materials for creative adaptation? How might a traffic jam become an opportunity for breathing practice, or a small living space become a chance to discover the freedom of owning less? Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. The stone-robed monk embodied this forgetting. He lived so fully present to what was needed in each moment that there was no energy left over for self-pity or comparison with others. His contentment arose not from having his needs met in conventional ways, but from the joy of meeting them creatively. The mystery of his disappearance adds another dimension to the teaching. Like all authentic spiritual presence, his impact was felt not through permanence, but through the quality of his being. He left no teachings, founded no school, attracted no permanent students. Yet the stone remains, inviting anyone who encounters it to contemplate the possibility of profound contentment within the simplest circumstances. Tonight, as you rest in whatever comfort or discomfort surrounds you, can you sense the stone-robed monk's spirit? Can you feel the possibility of finding warmth not through acquiring more, but through fully embracing what is already present? As the Buddha taught, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. The stone waits patiently to teach us that true wealth lies in our capacity to find creative contentment with whatever life provides. As we arrive at the end of our time together, take a moment to notice the quiet space that has opened up within you. Can you feel how the burdens you carried just a short while ago have become lighter? This deep sense of calm isn't something you've been given. It's a stillness you have allowed to surface. a peace that is always present beneath the noise of a busy mind. The Buddha once said, "Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." This simple truth echoes through tonight's teachings. Each story has been a gentle nudge, reminding you to let go of what harms you. Whether it's releasing the pride of being the giver, accepting the natural cycles of life, refusing to carry the insults of others, or loosening your grip on what you believe you can't live without, the path to freedom is the same. The wisdom from these tales has now settled within you, a quiet resource you can return to any time you need it. Think of this feeling not as an escape, but as a return to your natural state. Notice the ease in your breathing, the softness in your body, the space between your thoughts. This is the clarity that arises when we stop struggling. As you drift towards sleep, know that this peace is yours to keep. It doesn't depend on a crackling fire or soothing music. It lives in your awareness. Carry this gentle strength with you when you wake, a quiet reminder that you always have the choice to put down the hot coal and simply be free. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.